Hey guys, hope you're doing well right now. Wanted to create a video to talk about the potential rules changes and the certain rules changes that we're going to have to the Little Big 12 in 2020 and 2021. But first and foremost, I wanted to reach out and say, I'm thinking of you guys. I hope you are all doing okay. Obviously, we are in an era of uncertainty, an unprecedented time. We have to practice social distancing. We have to do our part to flatten the curve. We have to stay in quarantine. These are all phrases you have heard before, and I want to continue to echo those as we continue to fight the coronavirus, this global pandemic. But we're still human, and we're going through the uncertainties of life on top of a pandemic. So many things have changed. There's a lot of tumultuous situations that we're going through. And I just hope that you're doing okay, that you are staying positive and staying as stress-free as you possibly can be. I don't know if you can be completely stress-free right now, but stress-free as you possibly can be. If you need any prayers, share them with us. Prayer requests, thoughts, concerns, joys, praises, anything to bring us together. That's what this group's for. I know that we are a fantasy college football league, the best fantasy college football league in the land, in my opinion. But ultimately, I think that we are a group of Christians, brothers in Christ, the body of Christ, coming together, helping each other out, staying connected, having a good time. We talk a lot of college football, sure. We talk a lot of sports. We talk about life. We talk about what's going on in our worlds. So if we can help each other out, even with something as trivial as fantasy sports, to bring us together, I think it's a win. And that's why I formed the group, and I hope you guys can take solace here in refuge. A little bit of an escape. Now, as far as the certainty of this year, I don't know. I really don't know. I talked about that today on the show, which, by the way, doing a 2-hour sports talk show, even on the weekends, not easy. You do it once a week. Think it'd be easy. Find something to talk about, and that's what we did, but it's not easy. Brutal right now as we have no sports, with cancellations and suspensions, postponements. Yesterday was supposed to be the first day of Major League Baseball season, opening day. Didn't happen. That's brutal. We'll get through all this. I know we will. But we talked about it on the show today that there is a possibility college football may not happen. Now, we're still in March. First game doesn't kick off until September. However, as you start getting closer and closer to September, you have to understand you're dealing with 18 to 23-year-old kids who need cohesion, need that structure. Spring games, spring practices, canceled. Summer conditioning programs being drastically altered as most student athletes are at home. Summer workouts are starting to get postponed. You'll start seeing more of those. You'll start seeing them get canceled. And you can't make up for that lost time. You get into fall camp now. If that's the first organized team activity that you have on a college campus, you're behind the 8 ball. Bob Bowlesby mentioned the possibility of playing college football games without students obviously, but without fans. Problematic, because that's the biggest revenue for some universities. And these football programs subsidizes so much. You would figure they would try to do their best to get 80,000, 90,000, 100,000 fans in the stands to help buoy the cost of the athletic department and of the university. The only way to do that is to postpone potentially. So I think it's a very real possibility. I don't know if it will happen. Again, so much can change between now and then. We can look at other parts of the world and see where we are. You don't want a rebound of this to happen at all. So we have to continue to flatten the curve. We'll see where we are here in the next few weeks. I would imagine 60 days from now, we'll get a better idea of where we are in college football. But we're still going to proceed as if we're going to have a season. I hope we have a season, guys. I know the last few years of this fantasy college football league have been a blast. So many people have enjoyed it. I think last year was our best season ever. Josh winning the championship. Congratulations to him. as he's starting to build that dynasty. But we, as an entire league, just bought into it. I think we had more participation than ever before. We had a massive trade deadline that I think was a success. I think the transfer portal and the keepers have become a mainstay in our league. And so I think we are in a good spot. I'm always looking to improve and to progress as a league, so I'm never going to settle. And that's why I'm always going to have ideas and rules changes that will be present. But I want this to be a collaborative effort. So if you have any sort of objections to what I'm saying, let me know. But I do want to talk about what league changes that are going to be happening this year. And I want to start with the obvious, clear-cut choices that I have made for myself that are going to be through executive order. These things will happen. They will pass, and they will take place in the start of the 2020 season. And then I'll get into potential proposals that I want us to have a conversation on. I don't think the first action after this will be to vote upon these measures. I want to hear people's thoughts about them. I think the first thing we have to do is have a conversation as a league. Okay? The executive orders, I imagine, will have universal support. And so that's why I'm just going to go ahead and make the decision. But these massive changes that I've been thinking about for a while, we need to have a conversation about it because it does make a difference. It makes a significant difference. And if we get into conversations about this and the majority of the league is not for it, well, it's not going to pass. I'm not going to vote on it. We'll just table that discussion. We won't worry about it this year. We'll worry about it for another couple of years maybe. But if we have a healthy conversation and back and forth, then we can have a vote on it and see who wants to take part in this. Now, I think it's a lot of positive steps. I really do. I think it's going to make our league that much more fun. So, without further ado, I'll start with the executive orders, a couple of them anyway, right off the bat. So, starting in 2020, we are going to really fine-tune our scoring system, and that's going to start with a decimal point system throughout the scoring process. What do I mean by that? Well, we already have half-point PPR, or half point per reception. Okay? So we have decimal scoring, but we still have the opportunities for ties. I want to try to decrease the chances of ties going forward, and I want to reward players who have thrown the most yards, rushed for the most yards, and had more receiving yards. Okay? I want to reward those players. So we're going to go to a full decimal scoring system for that. How does that work? Well, currently, we have 1 point for every 25 passing yards. Going forward, starting in 2020, we will have 1 yard equal 0.04 points. So it's going to go to the hundredths. Okay? So we're going to go to 2 decimal places. And if you take 25 times 0.04, you get 1. 1 point, right? So it's still the same increments, but rather than worrying about hitting that next 25-yard threshold to get a point, you're going to get rewarded for points in between those 25-yard increments. So, for instance, if you throw for 456 yards, if your quarterback throws for 456 yards, you would get 18.24 points. Whereas before, you would just get 18, right? So every yard's going to matter, and I think every yard should matter. I hear the potential pushback saying that, well, that could drastically swing games. I think it should. If you throw for the most yards, rush for the most yards, and receive for the most yards, just trying to keep that consistent. You have more receiving yards, more rushing yards, more passing yards, you should get rewarded for that. So yeah, it's going to make a difference. Now, for rushers and receivers, for running backs and receivers and tight ends, it's fairly simple. You get 1 point for every 10 rushing yards or 10 receiving yards. We're just going to make that 0.1 point for every rushing or receiving yard. So if you get if you get 143 rushing yards, you get 14.3 points. Fairly simple. Okay? So we're going to break down the scoring into full decimal scoring going forward, and I think that's going to help avoid ties. But it's also going to make every yard count. So be aware of that change that's going to happen starting this season 2020. Another change that's going to happen is our kicking structure, our field goal kicking scoring. Now, I need to apologize. I don't think the scoring was properly distributed last year. I think what happened is I put the field goal scoring on the defense and special teams, and the place kickers didn't get properly awarded field goal points. I apologize for that. It affected everybody the same, at least, in terms of how their kickers were scored. So it wasn't as if there was a disadvantage, but we need to make sure that that's ironed out so points can be properly allocated for kickers. I think going forward, what I will do is we will have extra points be 1 point, obviously. Field goals of 39 yards or less will be worth 3 points. Field goals in the 40s, 40 to 49 yards out that are made, these have to be made field goals, obviously, 4 points. And then 50-plus yard field goals will be worth 5 points, okay? So, fairly simple. 39 yards or less, 3, 40 to 49 yards, 4, 50 plus 5, okay? And any missed field goal of any distance will be minus 1 point. You will get penalized for it, but you will get penalized for missing a 52-yard field goal the same as you would get penalized for missing a 36-yard field goal. Okay? We'll make those changes happen. Finally, the last executive order that I have is to cap the amount of quarterbacks you have on your roster. Now, I'm not going to get into too much detail on it because it does play into what I want to talk about and discuss with you guys, but know that I'm going to put a cap starting this year on it because we do have members of this league who sometimes can't attend the draft, and I understand that. We're all busy and juggling schedules of work, life, home. It can get tough. Sometimes you just can't make the draft. I don't want people to get stuck with 6 or 7 quarterbacks because Fantrax assigns it that way. I'm going to cap it at 3 quarterbacks starting in 2020 if we keep the system that we have. That leads me to what I want to talk about as potential changes. So, understand that these won't happen unless we vote upon it as a league. And I want to start by saying I think we have an incredible league right now, but I'm always looking for ways to advance and to improve. And one of the ways that I want to do it, and I've mentioned it in years past, and I think we have some members of the league who'd be for it, others who may not, but I want to mention this. I want to try to bring in all 130 FBS teams. Every FBS school should be eligible to participate in the Little Big 12. That means you'd have all of the Power 5 conferences, all of the independents, and all Group of 5 conferences. Last year, I would argue that the Mountain West was one of the best football conferences. We didn't have any teams. We didn't have any players represented. That kind of stunk. You had Fresno State win 10 or 11 games. You had Boise State. You had Utah State with Jordan Love. Could you imagine somebody with Jordan Love as their quarterback? Granted, Jordan Love didn't put up eye-popping numbers like he did a couple years ago, but he still would have been a valuable quarterback to have, right? It didn't happen. Appalachian State from the Fun Belt Conference, the Sun Belt, which is the Fun Belt. Not in our league. Years ago, Northern Illinois was a powerhouse with Jordan Lynch, right? I want to be able to capitalize on some of those Group of 5 schools that are doing well and the Group of 5 conferences that have tons of marquee players. Here's why. I think more inclusion into the league makes for a better league. It's going to be more fun, right? Talk about the Sun Belt being the Fun Belt, right? More fun. I think it'd be more fun to have more teams into it. I also think that it creates a wider pool of players for the draft, which means that some of the later rounds in our draft will be more significant. I think you'd have a greater spread of players to a greater number of teams. You could stack more players on your teams. Now, that also can mean teams can do a really good job drafting and hoard a bunch of great players. That's the case regardless. But I think that as you include more players of high caliber, that just gets spread across to more teams because not everybody can have every great player. And it creates more roster flexibility. It creates an opportunity to add more players into keepers and a transfer portal, which I think will make those experiences more enjoyable. I think this is a good idea. That's my pitch for it. Hopefully we can get everybody in on board, or at least a majority, an overwhelming majority perhaps, of people who want all FBS schools into it. I think the concern in the past has always been the amount of research necessary to pull it off. I don't think it's going to be that complicated. I really don't. And I think where we all enjoy sports, I think it'll be enjoyable to do a little bit of research to see what group of 5 players stand out. And you can always just look at schedules, and you can always look at the points and yardages and touchdowns they've gotten so far and kind of make that judgment for yourself. I don't think it changes that much of what you're already doing. If we make the Little Big 12 an all-conference league, meaning FBS schools, no matter what conference they're in, can play. If we do that, I propose that we make the Little Big 12 a 2-quarterback league. And I mean that 2 quarterbacks would start. This is a very common thing in fantasy football, both in the pro ranks and in college. And I think in the college ranks, it makes a lot more sense because it's all about scoring. Anything that the Little Big 12 has ever done has always been in a direction of scoring more points. We, being the Little Big 12, want to mimic our sister conference, the Big 12. We want to be able to do that. And the Big 12 is known for offensive explosion, high octane, scoring shootouts, old school Texas shootout type games. I want to be able to mimic that with the Little Big 12. So we're going to include more points into this. And I think adding a 2-quarterback league or 2-quarterback system into that will just add to the league. Now, there is some stipulation to it. Okay, there's stipulation to how we are going to do this. Now, I need to put on my glasses. I didn't have my glasses on originally because of a glare, but I'm just going to have to deal with it. I want to make sure that I include everything into this. Didn't want the glare in, and I needed to be able to read. Okay, so if we include all FBS schools, we go to a 2-quarterback league. And in that 2-quarterback league, we're going to add more points, but there is a catch. You can't just stack FBS, Power 5 quarterbacks on top of each other. I don't want a situation where you can add the Oklahoma starting quarterback with the Texas Tech starting quarterback, which most years would have panned out really nice, right? Like, could you imagine adding Baker Mayfield and Patrick Mahomes in the same team? Why even bother? I don't want to do that. I don't think that this solution, admittingly, totally alleviates that, but I think it allows for more flexibility and the likelihood decreases of this happening. What I'm proposing is that your 2 starting quarterbacks have to be from separate kind of tiers of FBS football. In other words, 1 Power 5 starter, 1 Group of 5 starter, period. If you have 2 Group of 5 starters or 2 Power 5 starters on your starting roster, it is an illegal roster. You will forfeit the game. And we had that happen last year. So it is important. So, for instance, you could start the Wisconsin starting quarterback, Graham Mertz, Blue Valley North High School, down the road in Kansas City, by the way. Kansas City, Kansas, by the way. You can start Graham Mertz, and you can start Toledo's starting quarterback, because Toledo's in the MAC. Totally fine. I don't know who Toledo's starting quarterback is. Don't ask me. You could not start Fresno State's quarterback and Southern Miss's quarterback, and you could not start Oklahoma's quarterback or Texas Tech's quarterback. Makes sense? I don't want you to be able to stack Power 5 quarterbacks. I want it to be a little bit more thoughtful and strategic. And I think this will allow, again, for more players to help more teams, more quarterbacks to help more teams. Okay? Now, if we do this, we're going to have to do some massive roster restructure. I've already thought about that. So I think what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to increase the roster size. So if we go to a 2-quarterback league, we are going to have to increase roster size. I propose that we go from 16 to 20. So you'd go from 16 players, 10 starters, 6 on the bench, to 20, which would be 11 starters, 9 on the bench. Because under the executive order that I have of capping the quarterback play, if we go to a 2-quarterback system, I'm capping quarterbacks at 5. You can have 5 quarterbacks on your roster, and you can mix and match them however you want. You can have 1 Power 5 starter, 1 Group of 5 starter, and then you have 3 on your bench, and maybe you have 2 Power 5 backups and 1 Group of 5 backup. Maybe you have 3 and 2, Group of 5, Power 5. Maybe you have 4 and 1. Maybe you have, well, you can't have 5 and 1. I mean, you could, but then you're missing out on something. You can mix and match that however you want. But since the cap would be at 5, as opposed to 3 if we stay with a single starting quarterback system, if we have 5 quarterbacks on a roster, that would mean 11 more spots overall to fill 9 starting spots under the 16-man roster. So you have to increase to 20. Okay? That way, we build the depth for the starting or for the quarterbacks as needed, and then we build the depth for the rest of the skill positions. Defenses, kickers, the like. Okay? Hopefully, this will allow for some flexibility in bye weeks too. If we increase the overall roster, maybe you're not making massive dumps of players just because you are hit heavy with a bye week. Maybe you'll have more players to be able to siphon through, and you can better manage your roster during bye weeks. Now, the other element to this also is that we'd increase the keeper size. So currently we have a 3+1 system, 3 keepers plus 1 transfer portal player. The transfer portal player nominated, obviously, and then the transfer portal player received, which would bring our total to 4 keepers overall. So we have a 3+1 system. I'd propose we move that to a 4+1 system. Now, 3+1 equals 4 clearly. 4 of 16 is 25%. 4+1 equals 5. 5 of 20, 25%. Still keep the percentage of keepers to the overall roster. That's why I would go from 3+1 to a 4+1. Keep the same percentages. Now, the roster size would increase starting in 2020. Okay? If all of this were to be approved, we would go from 16 to 20 in 2020. But the keeper size increase would be for 2021, meaning this offseason, no matter what we do, whether we approve all of these measures or we reject them and stay with what we have, it is 3 keepers, 1 person nominated for the transfer portal. We do our transfer portal draft, 1 person taken from the transfer portal, 4 total keepers. Make sense? Great. The next year, 2021, if all of these get approved, we'd go to the 4+1 system. Okay? Let's see if I have anything else here. Okay, this is something that I really need help with on the conversation side of it too, because there is one catch that I have of the keepers and the roster construction. If we go to a 2-quarterback system, what I want to have happen is that for your keepers, remember, for keepers, you can keep anybody. Right now, you can keep any player and any amount of players as long as you get to the 3+1 to 4 somehow. You can keep a defense, a tight end, and a kicker for all I care, and we will laugh at you as you get last place. That's fine. You're totally allowed to do that. With the new roster construct, I want to make one limit in that you have 2 quarterbacks that you'd start. So let's say this year you have Spencer Rattler and a Group of 5 quarterback that's really killing it right now. Oh, I don't know. Boise State's quarterback that was a freshman last year, right? Maybe you got him. I need to do a little bit more research on college football right now. I've taken a little bit of a break. I need to get back into it, admittingly. But let's say you have those guys, and they kill it for you. You win a championship. Congratulations. Well, going into the offseason, ideally you would want to keep both those guys potentially. Maybe both those quarterbacks were the reason you won a championship. I don't want it to get to where you can just stack the quarterbacks and just make it inevitable. So, for quarterback keepers only, you would only be allowed to keep one quarterback. And it doesn't matter if you keep the Power 5 quarterback or the Group of 5 quarterback, but you are only allowed to keep one quarterback. That way, more good quarterbacks enter into the draft pool. This is an important distinction. Quarterbacks under this system would not be allowed to enter the transfer portal. Quarterbacks either have to be kept or entered into the draft pool, meaning that the only positions allowed in the transfer portal are running backs and wide receivers. Now, I don't know how I necessarily feel about that admittingly. I would like to keep quarterbacks in there, but I don't know how to do that. Again, this is where the conversation comes in. I don't want to have people keep two quarterbacks. I don't want to do that. If we can avoid that at all possible, that would be ideal. But I also want to make sure that I want to also make sure that we're doing a good job making it a fair and equitable league. And here's my concern with putting a quarterback into the transfer portal. So let's say we have our 12 teams, right? You'd have to have an even number is essentially how it works. So if 11 players kept a quarterback and then one team didn't, and they threw that quarterback back in the transfer portal, they would be under the stipulation of only keeping one quarterback. Under that rule, they'd automatically be forced to have to take that quarterback back and lose a draft pick in the process. You see what I mean? There would have to be an even number. And even with an even number, those two teams would be forced to take quarterbacks because the other 10 wouldn't take a quarterback. Now, maybe you put in a solid quarterback and at least you know what you're in the market for. But I think that would create a really weird market dynamic where those two teams would just create an inflated market and everything else would be impacted by that. You know, like, average draft pick does matter. So let's say the average draft pick is like a 9th rounder, but these two guys are spending 5th round picks to get a quarterback. Well, it's going to take the average up for everybody else. So I don't know how we make that fair. I'd like to keep quarterbacks in the transfer portal. I just don't know if that's possible. So we need to figure a way to do that. But again, ideally, we'd only have one keeper at quarterback. If you want to keep a quarterback at all. You cannot keep quarterbacks. And then they'd all go to the draft pool. But then they wouldn't be in the transfer portal, right? You'd have to pick running backs and receivers. And maybe that's a strategy. Maybe you say, I'm going to keep 2 running backs, 2 receivers, and then I'm going to go all in on the best wide receiver I can possibly get and just fill out my roster, and then I'll go get a couple quarterbacks in the draft. Maybe that's a strategy. I don't know. Maybe not having quarterbacks in the transfer portal is fine, but we need to be able to decide that. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going up against the 30-minute mark, and I knew this video was going to take about 30 minutes. So let's wrap this up. Here are the proposals that will take place by executive order from me, the commissioner of the Little Big 12. All scoring is decimal scoring. 0.4 points per passing yard. That equals 1 point per 25 yards. 0.1 points per receiving and rushing yard equals 1 point per 10 yards, right? Rearrange kicker scoring. Field goals of 39 yards or less, 3 points. Field goals 40 to 49 yards, 4 points. Field goals 50 yards or greater, 5 points. Every missed field goal, -1, regardless of distance. And then we will have a cap on the amount of quarterbacks you can have on your roster. Again, IR being excluded in all of this. You get 2 IR spots that are free spots that you can put injured players in. But once you call them back into IR, you may have to make drops, obviously. So, in a single quarterback system, the cap would be 3. In a dual quarterback system, the cap would be 5. The potential changes that we are looking into: open the Little Big 12 to all FBS schools. With that move, we'd move to a 2 starting quarterback system where you could only keep 1 Power 5 quarterback and 1 Group of 5 quarterback as your starters, where you could only have one of each. Couldn't stack power fives or group of fives. It had to be one power five starter, one group of five starter. And then in doing that, we would change the roster construct. We'd go from 16 on an active roster to 20 on an active roster, 10 starters to 11 starters, 6 on the bench to 9 on the bench, 2 IR spots regardless. The IR spots do not change, allowing for more roster flexibility and breathing room to add depth for other positions as we fill in more quarterback slots. Makes sense? And then we would adjust the keepers to 3+1, or from 3+1 to 4+1, with quarterbacks accounting for one spot only. You could only keep one quarterback, and then quarterbacks going either on a roster to be kept or directly into the draft pool, not into the transfer portal. Makes sense? Great. Hey, hope everybody's doing great. Now, I hope you guys are hanging in there, spending time with loved ones as much as you can. Let's stay safe. Let's have fun. Hopefully college football's here before we know it. And if you need anything, just let me know. I'd love to talk to you guys. Message on Slack. Let's keep that rolling. Off season's here. So I would like to have this discussion going, and in a week or two, we get to start voting on things. So that way we can get the process going, and hopefully in the summer, we can have our transfer portal draft, supplemental draft. And I've already got my friend Justin McLucky who's going to oversee it. So that is another thing, I guess, that's going to change through executive order. Rather than submitting your draft picks to me, you would submit them to my friend Justin. Okay? I'll give you his phone number, or we can have him on Slack. That way I don't see what everybody else is bidding for other players. Even though I had in my mind, I was like, I have DeAndre Swift and J.K. Dobbins as my top 2 targets, and I'm spending a 6th-round pick, and I got J.K. Dobbins for a 6th-round pick. Even though that did not change based on the incoming picks that I was getting for other players, there is a possibility that I'm seeing those draft picks and it's unconsciously leading to me changing my behavior. And I don't want that to happen. I don't want any speculation of that. So I'm just going to have my friend Justin, who's going to oversee things. He is a commissioner in a couple leagues, very trusted source for all things fantasy football, and he's totally in on it. He'd be glad to do it. So, be on the lookout for more updates. Let's get the conversation going so we can start voting on these measures, and I'll see you guys soon. Take care, everybody. God bless.